Habakkuk is right after the book of Nahum, and it's before the book of Zephaniah. So your Old Testament, minor prophets with major messages. And tonight we will be experiencing once again a timely word for us. And I happened to come across a presentation and by a minister, Chuck Swindoll. Some of you may know him, others you may not. But he was covering the book of Habakkuk, and he throughout the course of his week, he went to a gas station, he went to talked to different people in the grocery stores and different places, and he kind of wanted to do a survey. He took the word or the name Habakkuk, and he asked people. And so he asked this one lady, he says, what does the word Habakkuk mean to you? And she said, it must be some Jewish holiday. He asked somebody else, and they thought maybe it was a word spelled backwards, Habakkuk. Another lady thought that it was a village in Vietnam. A teenager thought it was a new horror movie. Another person thought that maybe he was a salesman for some kind of a new product and didn't want it. One lady thought that Habakkuk must be a fish that she had never heard of. But the one that kind of topped the list was he asked this older man. He says, "So what does Habakkuk mean to you?" He says. He got real serious. He said, "I think it's a disease of the lower back." So I've kind of spoiled it to do my own little survey, because I thought about going around the room and saying, what do you think Habakkuk means, or what is Habakkuk? But anyway, obviously from this little survey done many years ago, I think we could probably get some of the same results today. This is indicative of a book of the Bible that not a lot of people are connected to. And yet, those of you who have walked with the Lord for many years, there's certain phrases that have come out of Habakkuk that we will be able to say, oh, now I know where that comes from. Before we get started, I wanted to take a look into the couple of fun facts for the book of Habakkuk, just to give you kind of a reference point into the dates. 612 BC approximately. Habakkuk's name is only mentioned in chapter 1 and chapter 3 of the book named after him. No biological details are listed other than that he is listed as the prophet. The style of writing is a little bit unique in that it's kind of a dialogue. It starts out with the prophet asking God questions, and God answers. And then his response to that, and then God answers. And then the prophecy that comes as a result of that, and it ends with a song, a series of lines that are written for the psalmist. So it's got a lot of things. Just to answer the question, what does Habakkuk mean? It's got a lot of things into it. The next slide here is going to show you a couple of, sorry, not the next slide. You've got the wrong one up? Okay. So, get a quick look at this. She's going to pull it back, but that is 2 shrines. The top one is actually a tomb that they are accrediting to Habakkuk. The other one is found in Iran. That is connected to Habakkuk in honor of him. Islam as well as Judaism both recognize Habakkuk as a voice in their time frame, and obviously we as Christians would join in that it is a relevant message for us. So the name Habakkuk has several different meanings that have been connected to it. Number one, the emptiness embraced. And this comes from the idea that the name Habakkuk is connected with the idea of embracing or an ardent embrace. The emptiness embraced, ancient uh, scholars and sages understood that creation rests upon the everlasting arms of the Creator. And so that idea that it is an embrace of emptiness. When you think about creation, God moved over the face of the deep. It was without form, it was without void. It was that idea of emptiness, and God embraced that. Now, with that same thing in mind, obviously as a minor prophet, he's going to be bringing some things, and we'll come back to that down the road. The next connected to that as well with the empty is the empty bosom. And the story of Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 15, where Hannah pours out her soul to the Lord, and as a result, God blesses her by filling her bosom, but then it's emptied again, and then the child is dedicated to the Lord. In that same idea that some of the Jews have connected the idea of Habakkuk with an emptying of the bosom, or emptying out. Also, some of the Jewish people have connected it with the story of Elisha and the Shulamite family. In 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 16, this was the lady who told her husband, hey, the prophet keeps coming by here. We need to make a prophet's room. And so they built this little prophet's room, and every time the prophet came by, he would stay there. And the Shulamite, or Shunam, the city of Shunem, is in northern Israel. So the message of Habakkuk is to the southern kingdom of Judah. So there was some distance in that, if that is true. And it's just one of those things that is connected by tradition, by historical stories that have been passed along. The interesting thing about the Elisha Shunammite family is this husband and wife didn't have any kids. And so after they prepared this room, Elisha says, go get the lady of the house, and he says, what can I do for you? You've done all this. You prepared this prophet's quarters. You've been so gracious, so hospitable. What can I do for you? And she says, I dwell among my people. In other words, I'm content with what I have right now. And so the story goes on that Elisha calls her again, and he says, this time next year, you will embrace a son. So the idea of Habakkuk and embracing an ardent embrace, the traditional thought is that Habakkuk was that son who ultimately becomes a prophet during that time. Now, that's a great story. I don't know, and quite honestly, it's not mentioned in the book. You're not going to see a lot of historical, like some of the other stories. Amos rose from this place and has the father of and the father of. You're not going to see that. You're not even going to see some geographical identification. But all of that is kind of the story behind the story, and hopefully you've got a little bit of that. Now, the last one that is connected with the word or the name Habakkuk is kind of a different twist. The empty and the emptiness and the empty embraced, all that kind of stuff. We get that part. This last one, in several different other languages, has some similarities and parallels. And it refers, the word Habakkuk, or name Habakkuk, refers to basil. It's considered a royal herb, venerated by repelling insects with its pleasant smell. So I'm not sure how they got basil out of Habakkuk, but this is what I found in my research and pulling this all together. Okay. And it has a very pleasant smell. So it's a repellent to bugs like mosquitoes and flies, and it's pleasing to smell. Sounds like something you'd put on rub on your ears or something like that to keep the mosquitoes away. Besides giving food a zesty tang, this article goes on, basil also has antifungal and insect repelling qualities, which not only comes in handy in practical reality, it also reminds of the observation that mosquitoes and flies have no collective house or social structure and spread nothing but disease and decay. Now, this is where I think we're getting more into the minor prophets and the message that they had, and the reason why God was using these smaller, less-winded, short messages, because Israel was stinking. The sin, the deception, the things that they were embracing, the idolatry, and we're going to see a whole list of them in Habakkuk, they were coming up before the Lord as a... And so what does God do? He sends some Habakkuk. He sends some basil to rub them and to hopefully push the flies and the mosquitoes away so that they would have a pleasant smell before the Lord. And you know as well as I do, those of you that are here and those of you joining us, I hope that oftentimes the Lord deals with that idea of an aroma, and he smells or he observes something pleasant, and so this idea of basil. Now it goes on a little bit further. The mosquitoes and flies and no collective house or social structure and spread nothing but disease and decay. The article then went on to share this. Hence the familiar name Beelzebub, or Lord of the Flies, which is a joke name because flies have no lord. Summarily, the Chaldean hordes, which Habakkuk envisioned to overrun Judah, mocked kings and rulers mocked at kings and rulers and are a laughing matter to them. We'll read that in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 10. So I don't doubt the first two definitions of embracing and ardent embrace and emptying out and those kinds of things. But this last one on basil really got my attention. Excuse me. And today, I don't know about you, but I've never seen a basil plant, okay? So I wanted to give you a couple pictures of that. However, I have seen basil leaves in a container just like that. Now that I know that it's a repellent, I think I may be rubbing that on when we go camping, or when we go fishing, or when we go out, or when I need to mow the lawn. I'll just give me a basil leaf and rub it around and see if I smell good to my wife, while at the same time repelling the flies and the mosquitoes, right? Okay. So, but I think in that same context, you've got these minor prophets who came and they literally rubbed the majority of Israel and its rebellion and idolatry the wrong way. There was a confrontation. There was conflict going on. And they were there to bring something that was supposed to help them repel the dynamic of what brings disease and decay. And so with that in mind, we'll jump into a little bit more of Habakkuk. The timeline that you're going to see, we've got a couple timelines here, but the timeline of Habakkuk covers about 100 years, a little under, a little over, approximately, depending on what you see. But these time frames included the Assyrian conquerors and the rise and the fall of Assyria, and then the rise and the fall of what we would call the Chaldean or the pre-Babylonian Empire. So Habakkuk kind of sits in between two kingdoms. One has risen and is now going to fall. Nineveh falls right before Habakkuk comes on the scene. And then you're going to see this other threat that comes up and actually becomes the hand of God in correcting the children of Judah. The lower nation, the upper kingdom, the 10 kingdoms had already been conquered. Now Judah was going to face some of those same challenges because of, and we're going to read about that in chapter 2, the 5 woes that Judah was guilty of. So Habakkuk is going to see the fall of the Assyrian Empire, while at the same time see the rise of a Chaldean Empire. The contemporaries, the other prophets who were operating and functioning at that time, we had Jeremiah, who was weeping He's the weeping prophet. We had Zephaniah, who was predicting. He was predicting the wrath of the Lord, and we'll talk about Zephaniah next week. He uses the day of the Lord and the wrath of the Lord oftentimes, so it's going to be a fiery, I don't know if it'll be hellfire, but it could be a fiery message next Wednesday. Then there was Ezekiel and his dreaming of what I like to call UFOs, unidentified flying objects that he was trying his best to describe, and one of these days we'll get into that. That's a great study. And then you had Daniel, who was just lying around. Y'all got it. I'm so glad. Anyway, these are pretty notable. Jeremiah, is a major prophet. Daniel's a major prophet. Ezekiel's a major prophet. Zephaniah, he's kind of a minor prophet. But this was the crowd and the messages, and each one of those had their message for the people. But before we get into Hezekiah, let me just take you back just a little bit to 2 Chronicles. Matter of fact, if you want to turn there with me, 2 Chronicles chapter 34. It's going to give us a little bit of history of what had happened just before Habakkuk comes on the scene. And it's very, very encouraging for teenagers. It's very encouraging for those who believe in God's ability to bring revival in the midst of all kinds of challenges. And it goes like this. 2 Chronicles chapter 34, verses 1 through 5 here. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king. How about that? You think you could be a king, Sam? At 8 years old? If we lived in that day, okay. And if you had the right daddy, right? Anyway, at 8 years old, Josiah becomes king. He reigns for 31 years in Jerusalem. And he did what was right in the sight of the Lord and walked in the ways of his father David. He did not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. The idea here is that Judah had some challenges. And if you were to read Chronicles before this, you would see that there was good kings, there was bad kings. And this is coming out of a time where there wasn't the best of kings. And Josiah, at 8 years old, says, you know what? We're going to do things differently than what I've seen before. Verse 3 says, in the 8th year now of his reign. So if he was 8 years old when he started, you add another 8 years to that. How old is he now? 16. How old are you, Caleb? 15? 14? 12? I know you're 12. Okay. Imagine being 16 and a king, having all kinds of power, having all kinds of opportunity, and making that decision to say, you know what, I'm going to start not just doing things different, I'm going to start seeking the Lord for myself. The implication here is a revival started at the throne, and it began to affect the whole region, I hope. For in the 8th year of his reign, while he was still young, he began to seek the God of his father David. In the 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the high places, the wooden images, the carved images, and the molded images. They broke down the altars of the Baals in his presence, and the incense altars which were above them he did cut down. And the wooden images, the carved images, and the molded images he broke in pieces and made dust of them and scattered it on the graves of those who had sacrificed to them. He also burned the bones of the priests on their altars and cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. Verses 6 and 7 tell us he continued to do this, not only in Jerusalem, but throughout the area. And he continued. Now, you want to talk about a revival, that's when revival is taking place. Not just when I'm sorry for what I did, but when I'm sorry enough to be able to take those things that were not pleasing in the sight of God. Take those things that were defiling the house of God and be able to destroy them. Not only to destroy them, but make a statement about those who sacrifice to them. When you take the gods, false gods of other religions, and you destroy them, and you take the ashes and you put them on the graves, you're basically saying, I am stronger than your God. And that was a common practice in those days, where you would conquer a nation and you would take their gods and they would become subservient to you because you conquered them. This revival takes place just prior to the coming out of Habakkuk, in which he declares some things that, like I said, I wish I could say that Josiah's revival was one that absolutely turned the whole nation around 180 degrees. But unfortunately, what we're going to read in Habakkuk is, while the king may have changed, and while he got rid of all of those things, there were still troubles in Judah. Verse 1 of Habakkuk. Did I cover everything? Okay, we'll come back to that one. I will do it now. That way I don't have to stop. They have found, remember the Quran, or not the Quran, but the Qumran caves in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They have found 2 chapters of Habakkuk, 13 columns that are matching up to exactly what we are going to read tonight. The idea that what we are reading is some kind of made-up thing and it's lost in translation, it's lost in languages, is not true, because they are finding more and more evidence. And as we've gone through this year, the archaeological support for what we have should encourage us that we are not reading words that have been made up in the 1800s or in 1900s or by somebody who just had a dream. We are reading things that have been preserved over the years. Amen? So that is just encouragement to you to realize that what we are reading tonight is God preserving his word. And if he has a message for them, I venture to say that some of this tonight is going to be for us. Amen? All right. So let's start with verse 1 of Habakkuk chapter 1. The burden which is the prophet Habakkuk saw, which the prophet Habakkuk saw. Now that word burden could also be oracle, which is a statement of indicating something from the supernatural or divine to the human or humanity. But nonetheless, I like to play on that word burden, because when God gives you something and it's for other people, if you don't deliver it, it can become a burden. Okay, how many of you have ever had that happen, where God lays something on your heart, you know you need to share it, and you don't do it, and pretty soon it just kind of weighs on you. And I have a feeling that when God gave these messages, when they talked with God and he gave them these things, whether they were visions or dreams or whatever, they had to get it out. Otherwise, it began to weigh on them just like a literal burden. It starts out with the prophet's question. O Lord, how long will I cry and you will not hear? Even cry out to you, violence, and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Therefore the law is powerless, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore perverse judgment proceeds. Notice in this first portion, verse 2 and verse 3, the words how long and why. One Bible teacher noted these are 2 questions that we ask a lot. God doesn't always answer. How long? The psalmist said, how long, O Lord? The prophet said, how long, O Lord? And why? Now, when you were growing up, about 3 years old, there's a real good chance that you got into this mode where you wanted to know what the answer was. You wanted to know why. Look, the bird's in the tree. Why? Why is the bird in the tree? Because the bird wants to be in the tree. Why does the bird want to be in the tree? Because the bird's going to fly. Why do birds fly? And the list goes on, right? It's just like that never-ending question, and you just, why? The prophet's question today is on that same line. How long? And why? How long, O Lord, do I cry, and you will not hear me? I think we've all felt like that at times. I cry out to you violence, and yet you will not save. Why am I seeing iniquity? Verse 3, I don't know about you, but he might be talking about Minneapolis or Portland or Detroit. I don't know about you, but I have found myself wondering, why? Why is there still looting? Why is there still rioting? I've found myself asking somewhat of this same thing in our day in 2021. Why? Haven't we learned anything from the past? Haven't we become so educated that we know better? Why? Now, I can answer how long. Till the next election. Just kidding. We'd like to think that, though, right? Okay, I can endure for 4 more years or 2 more years. That midterm's coming, and there's all kinds of stuff coming out. But you get my point. We set these mile markers. We're like, okay, we can put up with this for 4 years, or we can put up with this for 2 years, or I can put up with this for 60 seconds. How long? How long, O Lord? Why? In verse 4, he lays out the reasons why there's trouble. He says the law is powerless. Am I the only one that's ever heard people talk about how there's no rule of law in some situations in our world? Justice never goes forth. Now, I got to be careful because I didn't live back then. But I know that we can all get into that situation where we tend to say things like, it never rains here. We forgot that it just rained 3 weeks ago. The wind never blows. Now, we don't say that in Idaho because we know that it's gonna blow. Maybe still right now, but it's coming, right? But we get into that point, and I can almost hear Habakkuk in this mode of asking God why, in this mode of asking God how long. It just seems like it's always been this way. Justice never goes forth. The idea that somehow there is the inability for justice to happen. So somehow that in Habakkuk's lifetime, he had never seen justice. Now, I camp on that just a little bit because I want you to understand this is the weight that is laying on Habakkuk's heart. He's asking these questions because it has evidently been such a challenging time that he's using words like never. He's using words like powerless. He goes on to say the wicked surround the righteous. Perverse judgment proceeds. Now wait a minute, didn't we just get done talking about how Josiah set things right and there was a revival going on? And here we are, not many years past that. Can it happen that quick? And folks, it'll happen again. It doesn't have to take very long for us to go from a time of revival into a time of reprobate life. And it wouldn't surprise me that there may be somebody already saying, Lord, how long are we going to have to put up with? And the list goes right there. Habakkuk is pleading, he's asking, he's making a question, he's going before the Lord, making his requests known. How long? Why? And in verse 5, God answers back. Look at what God says. Look among the nations and watch. Be utterly astounded, for I will work a work in your days which you would not believe, though it were told you. Now, how'd you like that kind of an answer? God, why are you doing this? And how long is this going to last? God says, oh, you don't even know what's coming, and if I told you, you wouldn't believe it. I heard an ad one time. It says, just tell me the truth. And the person says, you can't handle the truth. And that's kind of what came to my mind. Habakkuk saying, why has this happened? How come I say violence? There's all this stuff. How come all this stuff is going on? How long? Why? God says, man, I have got plans. But you wouldn't believe them if I told you. And I can almost hear Habakkuk saying, try me. Now that we're talking, lay it on me. Here he goes. For indeed, verse 6, I am raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and a hasty nation, which marches through the breadth of the earth, to possess dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity proceeds from themselves. Their horses also are swifter than leopards and more fierce than evening wolves. Their chargers charge ahead. Their cavalry comes from afar. They fly as the eagle that hastens to eat. They all come for violence. Their faces are set like the east wind. They gather captives like sand. They scoff at kings, and princes are scorned by them. They deride every stronghold, for they heap up earthen mounds and seize it. Then his mind changes, and he commits offense, ascribing this power to his God. I don't know what you just heard, but what Habakkuk would have heard was, you're going to do what? What God just said, Habakkuk's saying, God, how long until you correct us? How long until you change this situation that's not right here in Judah? And God says, oh, I've got plans, but you wouldn't even believe it. And then he starts telling them that he's going to raise up a nation that's nasty, that's hasty, that's vicious, that's violent. Remember what Habakkuk was crying out? Violence! Do you fight fire with fire? You get more fire. That's exactly what's happening here. God says, I'm going to bring something into Judah. I'm going to bring something into this place. And you think this is bad, you're going to see even worse. Now, we're gonna notice in a bit how this affects Habakkuk, but I want you to understand that what Habakkuk's saying is, God, please do something in Judah. This isn't right. We can't be having this stuff. We need justice. We need righteousness. We need all these things to be turned around. And God says, okay, I've got a plan. I'm going to bring in somebody that's worse than y'all. And Habakkuk, I can hear him saying, you're going to correct us in our bad state with somebody who's worse than us? How is that better? How many of you ever heard this one? Pride goes before a fall. God says, I'm going to bring in the Chaldeans. They're fast. They're furious. They can conquer. They take people. They conquer. They laugh at other kingdoms. They laugh at other things. They're going to walk into this place. They are going to conquer. But did you catch the last verse? He's going to change his mind. Something's going to happen in this nation's mentality. And they're going to transgress. They're going to commit an offense. Wait, They're pagans already. Notice that last line? They begin to give their gods credit for their victories. That's the offense. And that offense will ultimately, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that defense will ultimately lead to the fall that pride is guaranteed to bring. So, can God fight fire with fire? Yeah. Can God correct us with somebody or something that is worse than us? Do you think Balaam felt like he was the master of his donkey? You felt like maybe he knew a little bit more than the donkey did? And it was the talking donkey that finally got Balaam to stop long enough to think. This leads to the prophet's second question. Because he can't fathom this idea that God's going to correct this wicked nation of Judah and all of its idolatry and all of its violence, all of its injustice, with a kingdom that is worse than them. He says, "Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have appointed them for judgment. O Rock, you have marked them for correction. You are of purer eyes than to behold evil, and cannot look on wickedness. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously, and hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he? Why do you make men like fish of the sea, like creeping things that have no ruler over them? They take up all of them with a hook. They catch them in their net and gather them in their dragnet. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice to their net and burn incense to their dragnet, because by them their share is sumptuous and their food plentiful. So they therefore empty their net and continue to slay nations without pity." You know what Habakkuk just did? What we often do. When we go to God and we say, "Oh God, you got to help us. We got to fix this. This is wrong." God says, "Yeah, I'm going to bring somebody along who's you don't like. They're going to help you." Do you know what they do? As if God doesn't know. That's what Habakkuk's doing in this next one. He's saying, wait a minute. You are pure. You can't look on evil. Do you know who these Chaldeans are? Do you really understand how they operate? Do you understand how they function? Let me tell you. Just in case you forgot. Don't we do the same thing? The Lord says, "I want you to be still and know that I am God." We're like, I got 5 minutes. Okay, I got 5 minutes. I'll give you 5 minutes. God says, "No, I need 45 minutes. I ain't got 45. Do you know what I have to do in 45 minutes? Don't we do the same thing? Habakkuk, he's coming before the Lord with this burden, this weight of his nation, and things aren't right. Injustice is abounding. Righteousness is not happening. God, you got to help us. God says, "I have a plan, and you wouldn't believe it if I told you." Habakkuk says, "Go ahead, tell me." And when God gets done, he's like, "Oh, God, let me tell you how bad these people are." As if he doesn't know. Habakkuk then makes the wisest decision that we know of Habakkuk's life. The book kind of begins a transition at the beginning of chapter 2, verse 1. "I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me and what I will answer when I am corrected." In this verse, Habakkuk basically says, "I'm done talking. Habakkuk says, I'm going to find my position in kind of like a watchtower, and I'm just going to be quiet. One of the wisest things we can do when we don't understand what God is going to do is shut the mouth, bend the knee, and be still. Amen? Habakkuk comes to that point where he says, you know what? Obviously, I'm not thinking in the same way that God's thinking. Obviously, I'm not in the same thought process. I'm not in the same mode. Something's going on with me. So instead of saying, God, you got to change your mind, Habakkuk says, I'm going to position myself and be still and see what God has. Habakkuk couldn't fully grasp everything that God had just told him. God was right? If I told you, you wouldn't believe it. Tell me. I can't believe it. So what does Habakkuk say? I'm going to be quiet. One preacher said it this way, Habakkuk knew that a mist in the pulpit puts a fog in the pew. If he couldn't figure it out, if he was having a tough time trying to navigate how God was going to use something so much more wicked than Judah was, then he was going to be quiet. And I think sometimes, and I'll raise both my hands, sometimes we want to get something done rather than take the moment in that time of, I don't get it, and just be still. Notice that last line. When I'm corrected. He knew God wasn't going to change his mind. He knew he was going to have time. He needed time for his mind to be changed. We've all heard that verse, be still and know that I am God. There was a poet who wrote this poem. It says, in every life there's a pause that is better than onward rush. Better than hewing or mightiest doing. 'Tis the standing still at sovereign will. There's a hush that is better than ardent speech. Better than sighing or wilderness crying. 'Tis the being still at sovereign still. The pause and the hush sing a double song, in unison low and for all time long. O human soul, God's working plan goes on, nor heeds the aid of man. Be still and see, be still and know. Verse 2. Notice the first word. Then the Lord answered. When did the Lord answer? After Habakkuk finally said, I'm not going to argue with you, Lord. I'm not going to try to change your mind. I'm not going to try to tell you what you already know. I'm going to stand my watch till I'm corrected. And obviously we don't know the time frame, and sometimes one verse, the next verse, we think it's just like that. I have a feeling Habakkuk had to sit there for a while. But then he heard that still small voice. In the Hebrew, that word answered has the implication of a positive. How many of you ever asked a question and you got an answer, but boy, it was harsh? Okay, I think we've all been there. You're like, wow, if that tone of voice was a knife, you'd have cut it. And then how many of you ever got an answer and it was like pleasant? Okay, the word here, answered, is that idea of a pleasant response, or the imagery of as God answers, he's smiling. I want you to grasp that tonight, because so many times we get this picture of God like, oh, come on. You know, he's looking like, come on, how long? Like Jesus said to the two on the road to Emmaus, how long are you going to be slow of heart? You know, how long are you not going to believe what the prophet said? But in this area, in this particular story or book of Habakkuk, when God answers this time, it's almost as if he's enjoying the conversation. He's pleased with Habakkuk's response. The Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. That idea of reading and running, one person noted that it's the idea that, have you ever had a sign on the side of the road that you couldn't see as you were driving by at 55? You're like, what did that say? I remember playing the ABC game, traveling. Anybody else play the ABC game? Yeah. And you'd see the sign out of the corner of your eye like, oh, what was that? Other ones, you could see them whether you were doing 80 miles an hour or you could see it if you were doing 50. The idea here in this passage, in this particular verse is, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. The idea is he's going to read it as he's running. Another thought is, so make it big. Put this out there. It needs to be seen whether they're running or they're walking as they're traveling. The other thought behind this verse is that when they see it, they're going to run. Both of those apply to what's coming up, okay? Both of those apply. Number one, they need to be able to read it. Number two, they better do something about it once they have read it. Verse 3, for the vision is not yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it. You thought that was from one of those movies, didn't you? Wait for it. Wait for it. No, God said that a long time ago. Wait for it. Because it will surely come. It will not tarry. That word tarry, delay. In other words, God's saying, it's coming. I'm going to tell you some things that are coming, and there's going to be a time where you're going to think, oh man, this is never coming. It's coming. Don't doubt me. It's coming. It will not delay forever. Verse 4 and 5 indicate a kind of a commercial, if you will, about pride, about the wickedness. And I want to say this has to do with the previous kingdom that is going to come in and defining it, but it also lays it out as the reason as to why Judah has gone into the sin that it has gone. And it's because of pride. Verses 4 and 5 say this, behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. That sound familiar? We walk by sight or by faith? By faith. The just or the righteous shall live by faith. Indeed, because he transgresses by wine. Notice, these are the definitions of a proud person. He transgresses by wine. He is a proud man, and he does not stay at home, because he enlarges his desire as hell, and he is like death, and cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all nations, and heaps up for himself all peoples. The reason why I connect it to the Chaldeans who were coming to judge Judah is because that's part of the definition that we saw in the description both of Habakkuk and God of these kingdoms coming. That there was this insatiable desire for power. There was this insatiable desire to conquer nations, and they do it and they do it and they do it, and then they transgress by saying, look at what our gods did. And God says, at that point you've gone too far. And the same fire you brought will consume you. But I also think he's talking about the people who are going to be notified in these next 5 woes. People who knew better. People who should have practiced discipline. People who knew righteousness. But pride goes before a fall. Pride will cost you the path of righteousness. And so in verses 6 through the end of this chapter, there are several things that are brought to the attention of Habakkuk that he now needs to bring to the attention of Judah. Verse 6, will not all these take up a proverb against him and a taunting riddle against him and say, woe to him who increases what is not theirs. This is the idea of stealing or thieves. The proud person is into that. How long? To him who loads himself with many pledges. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will they not awaken who oppress you, and you will become their booty? There, because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you, because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city and all who dwell in it. Woe unto the thieves. In verse 9, the second woe. Woe to those who scheme, to him who covets evil gain for his house. That idea of scheming, a Ponzi scheme, if you will, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. You give shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many peoples, and sin against your soul. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. So thieving and scheming, both are going to be judged. And also, I want to put this in there, that these woes are not just what's coming, it's what is happening. And again, I don't think you have to look too far in North America, in the United States of America, to see that this applies to some of our own situations. Verse 12, woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed. This is addressing the murderers, who establishes a city by iniquity. Behold, it is not of the Lord of hosts, that the people labor to feed the fire, and nations weary themselves in vain. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. The next woe in verse 15, woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look at his nakedness. This is the idea that immorality is one of those things that is happening in Judah, but it's also the result of pride. You are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink and be exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, and the plunder of beasts which made them afraid, because of men's blood, and the violence of the land and the city, and all who dwell in it. What profit is the image? That its maker should carve it, the molded image, a teacher of lies, that the maker of this mold should trust in it to make mute idols. Woe to him who says to wood, awake, to silent stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it there is no breath at all. This is the last of the woes, and it's the woe of idolatry. So again, 5 of the woes, idolatry, immorality, murder, scheming, and thieving, is the message of Habakkuk to Judah. This is why somebody worse than who you are is coming to judge and coming to correct. And in God's love for Judah, he says this is going to happen. Habakkuk goes from a sob to a song. And I would venture to say that a lot of the songs that maybe are most popular, especially in the secular realm, are the sad songs. We like to think that we enjoy the upbeat, but I think there's a sense in our world where I want somebody to sing to me when I'm in sorrow. I'm feeling blue. I'm feeling sad. Now, I know there's a lot of upbeat stuff out there, and some of that is legitimate. But the song that comes out of this is not meant to be a sad song. Verse 1 of chapter 3 says, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on Ziggunoth. Now, what's a Ziggunoth? Not a kind of disease. It's not a fish. Ziggunoth to you and I doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and I'm glad somebody else did the homework and I came across it, because what it has the connection to is an overture. William tells, no, that's not it. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. It's that overture, okay? So the idea of a musical declaration. Handel's Messiah. Da, 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 da. Out of all of those woes, out of all of that challenge to how God was going to correct Judah, Habakkuk says, I feel a song coming. And it's just not a 7-11 song, 7 words 11 times. It's not a chorus. This isn't what we're about to read is not going to be just this nice little easy feel. Oh, make it powerful. I don't know if you've ever, I got a chance when I was in Bible school to do Handel's Messiah, and we did the whole thing. Man, that had moments where you were just, oh, and he shall reign forever. And I can hear it in my head. It's just on, and just boom, 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 boom. And it just radiates. So Habakkuk starts with a sob. I'm crying out violence. There's no justice. God, how long? Why? God says, you want to talk? Let me tell you what I'm going to do. You know what? You won't even believe it. Oh, tell me. I told you wouldn't believe it. But do you know how bad they are, God? Okay, I'm done. I'll be quiet. Now that I got your attention, Habakkuk, let me tell you. Here's the problem with Judah. Here's the woes. Here's the challenges. I don't know about you, but I just, in my imagination, I sense that even though it was bad, there was something in Habakkuk that rose up and said, oh, this is going to be horrible, but it's going to end well. This is not going to be the best of the best. This is not going to be our best life now. But when God is done with this, oh man, I want to be there. Let's see if you get that same sense out of this. I wish I could sing it, but I'm not going to. Oh Lord, I have heard your speech and was afraid. Oh Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. Now, you know where I got that from? Habakkuk is saying, it's gonna get hot. It's gonna get horrible. But in that horrible time, remember mercy. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. You know what Selah stands for? Think about it. Meditate on this. Now, if anybody, you need to mark this. If you need your Bibles, I'm serious, you need to mark this. Because if anybody asks you, where did God come from? There it is. God came from Teman. Where's Teman? I don't know. But I know that God came from there. Some of you are like, is he serious? I'm just telling you what it says. Now, we could get into that. We don't have time tonight. I'm running out of time already. But the reality of what we have in God's Word is there for us. There's some implications in Teman, and there's some implications in the Mount Paran, and all of that has so many implications on the greatness of God. That's why Habakkuk says, this needs to be an overture. It needs to be a declaration. God is present. The essence of that, verse 3, is the fact that God is not afar off. He is present. God is not on some mountain. We have to go look for him. He is present. His glory covered the heavens. The earth was full of his praise. His brightness was like the light. He had rays flashing from his hand, and there his power was hidden. Before him went pestilence, and fever or pestilence comes after him, followed at his feet. He stood and measured the earth. He looked and startled the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills bowed. His ways are everlasting. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction. The curtains of the land of Midian trembled. Oh Lord, were you displeased with the rivers? Was your anger against the rivers? Was your wrath against the sea, that you rode on your horses, your chariots of salvation? Your bow was made quite ready. Oaths were sworn over your arrows. Selah. Think about it. He divided the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and trembled. The overflowing of the water passed by. The deep uttered its voice and lifted its hands on high. The sun and moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of your arrows they went, at the shining of your glittering spear. You marched through the land in indignation. You trampled the nations in anger. You went forth for the salvation of your people, for salvation with your anointed. You struck the head from the house of the wicked by laying bare from foundation to neck. Selah. You thrust through their own arrows the head of his villages. They came out like a whirlwind to scatter me. Their rejoicing was like feasting on the poor in secret. You walk through the sea with your horses, through the heap of great waters. When I heard, my body trembled. My lips quivered at the voice. Rottenness entered my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble. In your wrath, remember mercy. Rest in trouble. When he comes up to the people, he will invade them with his troops. Now, I don't know if you got the sense of that song, but there's no defeat in there. There's victory. There's no devastation. There's revelation of the greatness of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The mountains tremble. The nations are defeated. Our God reigns. Then it ends with some powerful verses. Though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there is no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord is my strength. He will make my feet like deer's feet, and he will make me walk on high hills. From a sob to a song. From quietness and correction to victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. Notice the last part of that, verse 19. This song was meant to be sung to the chief musician, and it wasn't meant to be a cappella. With my stringed instruments. Verse 17. though the stores have no toilet paper, no hand sanitizer or bacterial wipes, though the food disappears in the store and animals disappear, what you gonna do? Habakkuk saw tough times were coming. And he knew it wasn't going to be long. And instead of, woe, woe is me, woe is those who are proud, because they're going to be judged. And as for me and my house, regardless of what happens in our economy, regardless of what happens in politics, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord is my strength. That's what we do when we know it's going to get worse before it gets better. Amen. Let's pray. Our gracious God, thank you for Habakkuk. Don't know a lot about him, Lord, but we've learned that out of our trials and challenges and out of our inability to fully understand, you can bring an overture, a new song. And I pray, Lord, that each one of us will take this message, take that time to make our requests known, take that time to then just be quiet until our thinking lines up with yours. Your ways are so much higher than ours. Help us to wait upon you. But Lord, let our hearts be settled that though it may not be easy, when all is said and done, and you have won, oh, what a day of rejoicing that will be. We love you, Jesus. Thank you for these promises that are ours. Walk with us, Lord, through this week. Bring us back together, rejoicing in the God of our salvation.